Hi everyone and welcome to this November bullet journal plan with me video. Today we have this dark celestial inspired theme with some watercolors and foil paints. To be quite honest, I didn't have much time to set up a theme this month, so this might be a little bit more simple and shorter video, but I hope you'll get some new ideas from it nevertheless. But without further introductions, let's get started with the cover spread as usual. And this time we're gonna start with this all over night sky background. I actually went through a few attempts before I found a way that worked for me. So first I tried sacrificing one spread in my journal to test if the notebook paper would be strong enough to stand a large watercolor wash with the wet on wet technique. I'm using the Mellow Days bullet journal that has watercolor paper, but I must say that this trial showed that a large wash is maybe a bit too much for it. The paper wrinkled a lot and it was quite difficult to blend the colors, so I'm very glad I didn't just go in with this method in the notebook. Applying this amount of water also bled through the paper, which is something that's gonna happen later in the video as well. So after I realized that this didn't work, I decided to bust out my fancy watercolor paper that I knew could take any amount of water. So I decided to paint this whole large paper, which is bigger than the bullet journal spread, but I thought I could maybe use the leftovers for other decorations and save some time that way. You could either use a flat brush or a large round brush for this. I honestly need to get a bigger brush for this purpose. It took me an unnecessary amount of time to first sweep water on this whole surface and then go over the whole thing with my black and dark blue watercolors. However, I wanted this to be very dark and I felt like the watercolors would have required at least 2 more layers to be dark enough. So I actually took out these 2 gouache paints instead that gave us the required pigment a bit faster. I did apply more water with the gouache paints than I regularly would if I just wanted to create a smooth color layer. I still wanted there to be some watercolor-like finish to this with some lighter and darker areas. I know it basically looks fully black in the video, but you'll see everything better when the whole thing has dried. In general, whenever I'm in a hurry, I like to reach for my watercolors because I think it's fairly quick to create some pretty color washes and just get a lot of drama with minimal effort. So that's why I thought this type of celestial theme would be perfect for us this time. Anyway, I let the paper completely dry before moving on to the next step where we are creating tiny stars all over the surface. I always use the same technique for this, where you dip a small brush in light colored paint, then dip it quickly in water and just tap the brush with a pen or other brush on top of the painting. If you have a lot of paint in your brush, you'll get some big blobs like I did here. We can fix this later, so it doesn't really matter. But overall, I just love how fine and random dots this creates. I usually go over everything in the end to add a few bigger dots here and there, but overall, I think this is a very quick and super useful technique to know. But now we have the whole background ready and I just trimmed out the edges and measured my notebook pages to get the correct size pieces. Gluing thick watercolor paper like this to the journal will make this spread slightly difficult to open and close, but I guess it's the price we have to pay for a decoration like this. I like to use double-sided tape whenever I need something to really keep the papers together. I think sometimes regular glue is just not strong enough for thick paper like this. The pages might also lift a little bit from the middle when you open and close the journal. So I decided to just shove some of the same blue color in there, which will make the center gap much less noticeable. But now we finally have this beautiful background to work with and really the options are endless at this point. I saw this picture online that inspired me to this whole theme idea basically. So I decided to create this geometrical drawing to the right side. I started by drawing these light lines with a paint pen, and I'm happy I went with this darker color. I think a straight white pen might have been a bit too bright. And then we're finally taking out the gold foil paint. That's gonna be the start of the show this month. So I just started to paint some different size circles along the lines which is true, and a few around them as well. I also wanted to add a bit of color variation, so I painted some circles with the same light gouache paints that we used for the stars. And I also tried to place a few of the circles strategically where some of the bigger pull-ups ended up, so I could clean them up a little bit. In the end, I think this is a pretty simple decoration idea, but I think it still looks really cool against the dark background, and also leaves us this whole left side to use for a big title and the monthly calendar. I've really liked combining the cover spread with the monthly calendar in the past few months. I just sometimes feel like having them both separately is kind of a waste of space, because I never end up using the calendar all that much, and it usually adds a really nice decoration element to the cover spreads too. So this time I decided to go with this brown dot grid paper, which is one of the last pages I have left of my Archer and Olive Neapolitan notepad. I was inspired by how Heda from Mochi Bujo makes her monthly calendars. Hers always looks so pretty, so I wanted to try a similar style where I slightly rounded the corners and otherwise lined all the boxes for this grid look. But after the calendar, the last thing we're gonna do here is to write the November title. I've gotten some questions about how I write these serif font titles, if I trace the letters or something, and I don't trace the letters. I draw the pencil sketches freehand while looking at a reference, but when I want these titles to look as pretty as possible, I do measure an equal space for each of the letters before I start this sketch. So I draw a small mark with my pencil to indicate the letter width, and then if I don't have the dot grid to help me, I usually line the top and bottom with a straight pencil guideline, which will help to keep the letters exactly the same height. Overall, I think this definitely takes some practice. I still remember the first times I tried to make titles like these and how my hands were shaking so much that it was impossible to keep anything neat, but I guess you just kind of slowly get used to it and build muscle memory to be able to create straighter lines over time. That being said, a small brush like what I use here is not an ideal way to go. This was very fiddly and took me a long time because I constantly needed to go back to intensify the paint, but I do really like how this gold font stands out in the end. I finished the whole cover spread with these quote stickers. These are from Paper World, which is my latest affiliate partner. All my affiliate codes are always listed in the description, by the way. I know I rarely mention them, but just so you know. And all the other tools and details are listed there as well. And when it comes to this theme, this will be available as a digital download on my shop and also on my Patreon. In the lower $2 tier on my Patreon, I also post a monthly digital journaling kit, which always has some titles, pictures, and decorations related to the themes. So if that's something you'd be interested in, the link to my Patreon is also in the description. But anyway, that's finally it for the whole cover spread, so now we can finally move on. And next we're gonna prepare this double Dutch door area that will cover all the rest of the pages in this setup. So I wanted some scrapbooky elements in this theme, and I thought having the edges showing all throughout the pages would add an interesting element. So we are cutting just a tiny sliver from the outer edges and then a bit more from these 2 pages in the middle that will end up being for the weekly layout. Then I added this brown craft paper to the outer pages to kind of frame this whole area. The last page will get a fully brown spread, and the first one here will just get a small ribbed brown edge. But next, let's start to work on this first spread, which will be some sort of overall monthly planning spread. We'll first add a quick wash of watercolor to the top and bottom corner. I had some ideas for the decorations, and I just felt like the spreads needed some more blue color, so that's why we are creating these background washes. In all honesty, I think this spread was kind of a hot mess. It did start to come together after adding all the titles in the end and so on, but the process was not too convincing. I also noticed that the paper in this notebook does bleed through quite a lot, especially from the sides of the pages. I think I've definitely added this amount of water in my other notebooks without it bleeding through, so that's something I was a little bit disappointed by. I think the colors blend better overall, but since this is marketed as a watercolor bullet journal, I hope these types of washes didn't bleed through quite as easily. You can see it better when we flip over to the next spread. But anyway, after the washes, we're gonna start creating some decorations here in the bottom left corner, where I used some of the leftover night sky painting to make some circles and decorate them with foil paints. Something I really love about these geometrical designs is that they are pretty easy to create. There is not a lot of pressure because you don't need to draw anything too difficult. You can just create a bunch of shapes and combine them with different colors. So whenever I'm low on time, I like to go for easier decorations like these where the chance of failure is a lot lower, so that I won't be stressed out of my mind while I create these pages. After adding all of these, I felt like the corner still looked a little bit empty somehow, so I decided to just add a bunch of small black dots and sparkles to fill up the space a little bit, and after that we can finally start with the content of the spread itself. One reason I wanted to darken up this top part with the watercolors was that I wanted to use the gold paint for the title here. Now I think it should have maybe been a little bit darker still. I felt like the gold color didn't stand out all that well here. It does look nice when the light hits the paint and you really see the foiled effect, but otherwise maybe not the best color choice here. But anyway, I just wrote this month here, and then I just listed 3 big things that are happening in my life this month. The biggest reason I didn't have much time for this video is that we kind of suddenly found a really good apartment. We've wanted to move for a while, but we haven't really looked for apartments that seriously. But then out of the blue, this perfect apartment just appeared, and in the end, we are moving in the beginning of November, which couldn't be worse timing for me. The end of the year is always kind of hectic with all the extra videos and Black Friday sales on my shop and so on. I also traveled to Finland during the holidays to spend time with my family. So it just all means that I have a lot of stuff to do in a short amount of time, but you know, when you have the opportunity, you sometimes just need to take it and hope that everything works out in the end. So that's what I'm gonna tell myself this month. Anyway, there are so many things you need to do when moving, so I just made this whole moving task list here that will hopefully help me out. And then I added this bigger brown box to the second page, which will be a place for me to write some sort of plan for myself for this month. I like to do this to really set my focus, because otherwise I'm very likely gonna try to do too much all at once. But then let's quickly finish the decorations here before moving on. So I ripped a piece of the night sky painting and then I wanted to paint some dangling objects on top of it. Again, very celestial inspired, and I think the gold foil fits these stars and moon very well. But that's it for the monthly planning spread. It's not my favorite, to be honest, but it always doesn't have to be. And now let's move on to the inner section of the Dutch door thingy. And now we're gonna set up the weekly pages. We're gonna start here with these black craft paper pieces that I wanted to use for these geometrical mountains or dunes. Again, I saw a picture with a pattern like this online and thought it would suit this theme pretty well since we can use the gold paint for it. So this is pretty straightforward, but I'd say that the main trick here is to make these first dividing lines thicker than the lines inside of the mountains, if that makes any sense. So by altering the spacing and thickness of the lines, we are able to make enough difference to create these mountain shapes. Painting these actually took a while, so after I was done with the first side, I decided to add a week's title here. So this first page is straight up just gonna be a filler decoration page, and the weekly stuff is going in the middle. I really like these Dutch door layouts because this way you don't need to paint something every single week or even think about a unique layout or setting it up, but you still have some room to create maybe one bigger drawing that's decorating the weekly pages for the whole month instead. But after the title, I also added some circle decorations here that would tie things together with the cover spread and also add a bit more blue to this spread. I think the bigger moon here shows how watercolors blend together a little bit better than in a regular bullet journal. So even though I had some complaints about this paper, there are good points about it as well. Anyway, my weekly layout this time is very boring. All I did was just list all the days of the week, and I have just enough space to list a few tasks per day. I honestly think I won't have much time or energy to track anything more or use my bullet journal much in November, so I think keeping things simple will work for me just fine. I'll probably do something very similar for the rest of the weeks. We are actually gonna do the same thing on the last page later, just so you can get the idea of how this theme looks overall. But before that, I just did the same mountain decorations to the other side of the Dutch door and then added this brown grid paper box that I'll probably just use for any random notes or thoughts I have throughout the month. The second page still looked pretty empty, so I ended up creating this larger circle decoration. I wanted everything to be as neat and symmetrical as possible, so I used a ruler for all the lines, but other than that, it's again just a lot of circles and lines combined, nothing fancy, and I was just adding elements here as I went on until I thought it looked large and intricate enough to fill this space. So that's all for the weekly section, and now let's move on to the last spread of this setup and the one with the brown page, which will turn into a monthly reflection spread. I still had a few pieces left of the night sky painting, so I decided to use them here to keep things cohesive. Adding this ribbed piece in the corner also showed up on the other pages, and I think it actually suited them well by adding a little bit more blue throughout this setup. Then I did a very simple side decoration here on the first page using some half circles and gold paint again. I feel like pretty much all the decorations this month are quite self-explanatory, so I have no idea what to tell you guys about the process, but I hope you've at least got some new ideas nevertheless. But anyway, after writing the reflection title, I added a white box on this brown spread using one of the pieces we cut out from the Dutch store page. I followed with this extra title box style that we've done throughout the setup, and I think it added a fun element to these boxes. Then I didn't really need this bottom space here, so I decided to add a similar dangling decoration here as we did on the planning spread. The gold paint doesn't stand out as well from the brown paper as it did from the white notebook paper, so these didn't maybe have the same effect, but again, when the light hits the decorations, they do look very pretty. But then when it comes to the actual content of the reflection page, I tend to keep these pretty similar. So I started with this graph where I can review the whole past month on these different areas of my life from 1 to 10. I think it's always pretty interesting to see how these things correlate and also change throughout the year. But after that, I'm gonna use the first page to write about just whatever is on my mind at the moment or what thoughts the month happens to bring up. And then I also like to consider what I could do differently to maybe avoid falling into similar problems in the future, which I still definitely will do, but at least writing about it every month makes you really take in the problem. Then lastly, I used the white box to just write about anything I'm grateful for in my life. So that finally wraps up this November setup. I really hope you enjoyed this theme and video, even though it was a little bit more on the shorter side for me, and that you got some new ideas for your own celestial themes. But I guess that's all for this time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye!